When Etsy and I decided I would preach today, I was delighted to find this week's lectionary text was about Adam and Eve, which is one of my favorite biblical stories. Then I realized there was one problem. Because this is one of my favorite stories, I've already preached on it at DMPC. That's okay, I reasoned. I preached on this a couple of years ago, so I'm not sure who would remember it anyway. Then I realized I hadn't preached on Adam and Eve, or Eve and Adam, as I honestly think about it, a few years ago. I preached on it in late September 2019, almost exactly a year ago. Friends, I think you will agree that it has been a very, very long year. We are witnessing natural disasters exacerbated by climate change that have literally set the West Coast on fire. We are reckoning with the corruption and injustice reeking from some of our most basic institutions. A global pandemic has upturned our lives and killed over 192,000 people in the United States alone. And we are each struggling with our own challenges and tragedies, which are no less real or important than the stories dominating the news. In short, we are a world and a community engulfed in grief. Given this context, I laughed a little when I read my 2019 sermon on Eve and Adam, which celebrates Eve's decision to take that first bite of fruit and send us all on this journey called humanity. I argue that it was only by gaining a knowledge of good and evil and leaving the garden that humans were able to learn and grow. That it is by leaving the garden and experiencing hardship and pain that Eve and Adam are able to understand and then experience true joy. I encouraged us all to follow God's call out of the garden, out of places of surety and complacency, to embrace the riskier but far more rewarding world of change and learning. A world where we could experience true joy. I'll be honest, after reading today's passages and my former sermon, there's definitely a part of me that would rather take Eden right now. Part of me is fine going somewhere that is beautiful and safe, even if it means I won't be able to learn, grow, or live joyfully. There's part of me that's willing to sacrifice all of that just to make the pain stop. I'm tired of mourning. I'm tired of feeling hopeless. I'm tired of being afraid. I want to return to Eden. Friends, I wonder how often Eve wanted to return to Eden. Even in my interpretation of the story, where Eve's choice to eat the fruit is an act of courage and faith, I wonder how often she wished she had stayed in the garden. I wonder if she lay awake at night, 9 months pregnant and unable to sleep because the baby growing inside of her kept kicking in the most uncomfortable places possible, and it hurt so much last time she gave birth that she is terrified to do it again. I wonder if she broke down crying one afternoon after she had killed her third snake of the day because they kept getting into her shelter and she didn't know why, and she couldn't imagine keeping on doing this for another day, much less her entire life. I wonder if on days like that, she sometimes walked to the edge of Eden, right up to where the cherubs stood guard with flaming swords, and spent hours staring at the impossibly green trees, the perfectly ripe fruit, and the crystal clear river. It is so easy, especially now, to long for the past. I miss the days when we could sing together, hug each other, and break bread together. I miss our sanctuary, our choirs, our coffee hours, and I am counting the days until we can do all of these things again. But friends, God doesn't call us to find Eden. God doesn't call us to make things as they were before. God calls us to build God's kingdom. God calls us to turn the world upside down. God calls us to eradicate injustice and oppression so that we see each other as we are and treat each other as we are, as children of God. When we lose ourselves trying to recreate an idealized version of the past, we lose sight of God's coming kingdom. More than that, our determination to chase Eden can lead us to sacrifice our own freedoms and, worse, support the oppression of others. It may seem incredible at first that people would willingly sacrifice their freedom for an imagined past, but this is actually a common phenomenon, even on a national scale. Perhaps the most notorious example is Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler didn't lead a violent revolution. He was lawfully elected. He manipulated the fear and grief of a nation reeling from a near total economic, political, and social collapse because of World War I and the Great Depression. He promised to restore Germany to its former glory. He told them that white, straight Christians were special, so they deserved to put themselves first. All Germany needed to do was turn over some of their freedoms. They just needed to eliminate a few inefficient and inconvenient pieces of their democracy. They needed to increase the size and power of their police forces to keep society safe. They needed to grow the military so that they could expand their territory. After all, they came first. Hitler also claimed that there was a simple cause to all of their problem: Jewish people living in their country. So Germany needed to be brave enough to do what no one else would do and eliminate the existential threat they posed. Hitler promised to return Germany to the past. He promised to recreate Eden. What we often forget, or just neglect to mention, is that during this time, Hitler and fascism more broadly were popular in the United States too. Research conducted by Severgnitsky, a Canadian political scientist, reveals just how enticing Americans found fascist ideologies. A 1940 poll revealed 20% of Americans considered Jews a national menace, and another in 1942 found 1 in 6 Americans supported Hitler's anti-Semitic policies, even in the middle of the war. American celebrities, religious leaders, economists, political scientists, and politicians openly praised Nazi Germany and advocated for integrating elements of fascism. And yes, some of them used the word fascism into American government and society. As in Germany, pro-fascist Americans, exhausted and scared after the devastation caused by the Great Depression, wanted to return to an idealized version of the past. And if that meant marginalizing and oppressing Jews and people of color, well, that was a small price to pay. Anything was worth recreating Eden. A willingness to sacrifice the lives and well-being of others, as well as our own freedoms, in the face of fear and grief is not unique to the 1930s and 40s. We again live in a nation with drastic income inequality, a rapidly changing economy that is leaving millions behind, political polarization, and now a devastating pandemic with a horrific recession accompanying it. People are scared and they are desperate to return to the good old days. These good old days are usually depicted as a world where America, and specifically white Christian Americans, always come first. It depicts immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ folks, Muslims, and anyone else who doesn't conform to an incredibly specific definition of normal as dangerous, as other. This vision justifies the murder of Black and brown Americans by the police, discrimination based on gender and sexuality, the separation of immigrant children from their families, state-sponsored aggression against peaceful protests, the weakening of democratic institutions. This vision even makes excuses for murders committed by white nationalist militias. In other words, murders committed by Nazis. Make no mistake, this search for a restored America, for a return to greatness, is predicated on bigotry, oppression, and violence. Friends, we live in difficult and uncertain times. Our nation, our city, and our church are in the midst of dramatic and unprecedented change. And it's okay to be scared. I'm scared. But we have an important choice to make. We can lean into our fear and choose to chase Eden. We can try to recreate an idealized past that never truly existed, whether that be a time when America was great, or Baltimore was booming, or DMPC's pews were filled every Sunday. Or we can accept God's invitation to God's kingdom, a kingdom predicated on justice and love. Perhaps Eve did stand at the edge of Eden, reminiscing about a place that was gone forever, a place that offered her comfort, but not growth, a place where life was easy, but not joyful. But I think in the end, she always returned home. I think when she arrived at their little camp, her children ran to greet her. I think Adam looked up from where he was fixing the hole in the wall where the snakes kept getting in and smiled. I think when evening drew near and the day's work was done, Eve sat with her family and watched the sun set. I think she took a deep breath and remembered that she and Adam were literally created by the breath of God. I think she reminded herself that while she was no longer in Eden, God's Spirit, God's Ruach, flowed through every breath she took. And I think she felt grateful and proud of the life her family had built together, pregnancy, snakes, and all. I think she always chose to follow God's call to create something new. So may it be with all of us.